All right, so this should be a pretty brief talk, and you guys probably already know all this stuff, so the idea was that I could do something very easy that's achievable for me at my level of cognition to basically put all of this into context. So to do that, I'm going to start in 1994, which was a very good year for both rock music and revolutions. Particularly, this product was launched then, which is Netscape Navigator. How many of you guys ever used this product? Okay, great. How many of you guys used Internet Explorer? Less. Okay, I like this audience. No offense, Microsoft. But so the amazing thing about Netscape and the web, of course, at that time was that it gave millions and now, of course, billions of people the ability to access, share, and publish information in a way that had basically been unprecedented up to that point. It had been very slow, very costly, and so on. And this revolution, of course, started in the 60s, but I'm sort of fast-forwarding 30 years or whatever to get to this. And actually, I have some audio. Let me see if this is going to work. I'm going to hope for the best. I don't know how this is going to work with a mic, but we'll see. So in 1994, this is actually a clip of Steve Jobs talking about, actually 95, talking about something that turned out to be pretty prescient. Let's see if this works. Hold on, wait.
Well, I think the internet and the web, there are two exciting things happening in software and in computing today. I think one is objects, but the other one is the web. The web is incredibly exciting because it is the fulfillment of a lot of our dreams that the computer would ultimately not be primarily a device for computation, but metamorphosize into a device for communication. And with the web, that's finally happening. And secondly, it's exciting because Microsoft doesn't own it, and therefore there's a tremendous amount of innovation happening. So I think that the web is going to be profound in what it does to our society. As you know, about 15% of the goods and services in the U.S. are sold via catalogs or over television. All that's going to go on the web and more. Billions and billions, soon tens of billions of dollars worth of goods and services are going to be sold on the web. A way to think about it is the ultimate direct-to-customer distribution channel. Another way to think about it is the smallest company in the world can look as large as the largest company in the world on the web. So I guess I think the web, as we look back 10 years from now, the web is going to be the defining technology, the defining social moment for computing. And I think it's going to be huge. I think it's breathed a whole new generation of life into personal computing, and I think it's going to be huge.
So what's kind of amazing about this quote, it's so weird, this is 1995, and he's like, 10 years from now, we're going to think the web is amazing. That was in 2005. Now, here we are 10 years later, and the thing that's kind of amazing is that what I think he was actually getting at and talking about, we are now actually on the verge of doing. So it sucks to be early sometimes, but eventually these things play out. So if you think about what defined a personal computer back in, 2004-ish, I don't know, 1998, this was sort of what they thought of, moving away from mainframes and into this style of machine. But the thing is, this design was influenced and controlled by a very corporatist kind of agenda. In other words, if you had a top-down hierarchical model of your business, then this is how you actually gave your workers the ability to do more work that was controlled sort of centrally. Eventually, we decentralized to a smaller personal computer, but of course it only did a few things. And without sufficient network capabilities, without sufficient battery life, without the ability to have software to extend it, it was not so great. And so this was sort of extending the power of the workforce out into the world, but it really wasn't about personal empowerment yet. And so things started to change in 2007. And so this happened to be a very important and very good year for technology. And I'm going to play another clip. This is not all about Steve Jobs, but I think it's relevant to show where we've come from and where to basically give you some insight into where we're going. So this is actually the announcement of the iPhone. So here it is. It's a little bit long, but watch. There's a bunch of really great stuff in here.
What we want to do is make a leapfrog product that is way smarter than any mobile device has ever been, and super easy to use. This is what iPhone is, okay? Why do we need a revolutionary user interface? I mean, here's 4 smartphones, right? Motorola Q, the BlackBerry, Palm Treo, Nokia E62, the usual suspects. And what's wrong with their user interfaces? Well, the problem with them is really sort of in the bottom 40 there. It's this stuff right here. They all have these keyboards that are there whether you need them or not to be there. And they all have these control buttons that are fixed in plastic and are the same for every application. Well, every application wants a slightly different user interface, a slightly optimized set of buttons just for it. Well, how do you solve this? It turns out we have solved it. We solved it in computers 20 years ago. We solved it with a bitmap screen that could display anything we want, put any user interface up, and a pointing device. We solved it with the mouse, right? We solved this problem. So how are we going to take this to a mobile device? Well, what we're going to do is get rid of all these buttons and just make a giant screen. A giant screen. Now, how are we going to communicate this? We don't want to carry around a mouse, right? So what are we going to do? Oh, a stylus, right? We're going to use a stylus. No. No. Who wants a stylus? You have to get them and put them away and you lose them. Yuck. Nobody wants a stylus. So let's not use a stylus. We're going to use the best pointing device in the world. We're going to use a pointing device that we're all born with. We're born with 10 of them. We're going to use our fingers. We're going to touch this with our fingers. And we have invented a new technology called multi-touch, which is phenomenal. It works like magic.
Yeah, so you can sort of see how the state of the art back in 2006 was for there to be these hardware keyboards. And now, fast forward, 11 years, 12 years, not only do we have a plane of glass to provide our services through, but now we have keyboards that you can swap out to actually change the way that we actually express ourselves to computers. So if you go all the way back in time to the early 60s, when the Cold War was funding the development of computers, it was really about allowing soldiers and infantrymen to be, well, not infantrymen, to be able to communicate more effectively commands basically on the battlefield. Now we're moving into a space where it's more about person-to-person and social communications. And 2007 was really the big break from that era into the modern era of computing. So the thing that's interesting about the iPhone specifically was that it was a very personal computer in a number of ways that were, I think, somewhat revolutionary. It gave you access to music and entertainment. It gave you access to voice and the ability to call, and a modern operating system that was completely visual. The thing that's really interesting, though, is that at the time, Google had solved the distribution problem for documents and pages, but there was no solution for distribution for apps. And so, in fact, when Jobs announced the iPhone, there was no way to actually install apps besides the web. The web was going to be the distribution channel and model for extending the phone. However, and it's curious that, of course, today is WWDC, owing to that community's complaints, a year later, Jobs relented and finally actually adopted and released the App Store as a primary vehicle for distributing applications, conventional applications, to the iPhone. The same year, 2007, Facebook opened up its platform. And so it used the social graph as a means of distributing content, information, ideas, and applications. And meanwhile, some other things were happening with WhatsApp basically making SMS free. You used to have to pay per SMS. Well, you still do. And they said, well, look, we can do this with IP telephony, and so therefore we can make it free. And so they rode the wave of that. And Skype started offering video chat as a way of essentially getting around the carriers. So this was a huge moment in the mobile computing platform, I guess, paradigm. And of course, we're now and have been seeing a lot of changes since then. So if we fast forward through a number of things that happened basically between this period, Facebook identity won. I was part of the identity wars. We lost on the open web. Oops. Payments became something that people actually were willing to do on the web, whereas prior to this period, people were really afraid of the web, and it really wasn't a secure place to do business. WeChat, of course, opened up its platform and offered official accounts, which, of course, are in some ways one of the sort of driving interests for, I guess, for our world in terms of bots and agents and stuff like that because of the rise of this stuff in China. And meanwhile, Facebook started decomposing its core application into a number of component parts. And so now you can see that Facebook has 4 of the top 5 apps in the App Store based on the rise of social computing. Meanwhile, people started to move away from the desktop environment as being the primary place where they store their files. So they started putting their files on other people's computers and then accessing them remotely through more mobile devices. And Slack, as we know, of course, is recomposing the way that work is done. Workers can now work anywhere, wherever they want, be in touch with virtual offices in the chat context. We've also seen people learning to talk to their computers through Siri, which is, of course, an extension of the existing phone ecosystem. And we've seen the rise of a new class of computer, which is the room computer, which is an eye-free computer, which allows you to just speak utterances and have things happen. And in the mix of all this, we've had special applications that have been created to help you navigate the chat context and have conversations with software. So we've seen this sort of trend from, again, a world that's very declarative and based on a view of the world that was more hierarchical to one that's more ad hoc, more on the go, more on the fly, more mobile, and much more personal in the very real sense of people communicating to people as opposed to just businesses being the sponsors of those behaviors. So here we are 6 months into this year. I wrote a post in January calling this year the year of conversational commerce. I don't know if I was right or not, but there have been a number of things that happened since then that have, I think, as evidenced by this room here, that suggest that conversational software and that paradigm is going to be a defining one going forward. One of the reasons why I think this opportunity is so huge and why I get so many people sort of telling me, well, you know, this is dumb. I don't want to do stuff in chat. It's so much slower. My point to them is, well, you are not the actual users of this. You know, there are 2 billion people online today. There's a smaller number of those people who have learned and grown up with Google, who have learned to type a lot of things to get work done, who've learned to do a lot of work to get the computer to understand what it is that we want the computer to do. But there's 4 billion more people out there in the world that will come online in the next 10 to 15 years whose first computing experience may be entirely voice-driven, may be entirely touch-based, may be in a car. These are the people that conversational software should be targeted at, and these are the people who have a blank slate for understanding and bringing preconceived notions of how computing should work to the table. So when I define this, essentially my high-level insight is just saying, look, there's a huge amount of behavior in the conversational space around messaging, chat, and so on. And wouldn't it be interesting if our applications started to actually show up in those spaces as well? And what is the work that we need to do to help bring all of the people who I just talked to who are, you know, critics, cynics, or don't understand this change into that world so they can actually be part of it as opposed to resist it? In general, I believe that we're at a symphonic tipping point. There are so many things happening all at once, whether it's AI, whether it's machine learning, whether it's chat, whether it's messaging, whether it's whatever, whether it's app fatigue, that a lot of the people in this room have an opportunity to really define what this industry is going to look like going forward and how it's going to be open or not, and what those patterns are going to be that engage and enrich and diversify the number of people who can actually use the power of computing. Now, you guys have all seen this chart. I had to show it. Basically, it's showing the rise of messaging versus social networks. But given that I'm putting this all in context, I had to put it in here because it'll probably come up later on. But again, this sort of shows what's going on in the space. One of the things that I think is so interesting as well, of course, is that everyone's talking about like the downturn and, you know, VCs, all the money in the well was drying up. There's nothing to spend money on anymore. We've solved all the problems. Robots, great. But in this case, actually, suddenly they're like, oh, wait, actually, there's a whole new opportunity here to both create a market, grow a market, and have a lot of first movers. So it's really exciting to see, I guess, you know, not only like, obviously, all of our sort of geeky, nerdy, original interest in this, but there's also going to be money flowing into this, and that we can shape how that happens. So we all know that it's early. But the interest in the space, I think, is real, as evidenced by all the entrepreneurs who are moving into it. We know that bots are not going to be the be-all, end-all solution, but conversations, bots, all of those different things complement the existing apps that we already have and allow them to break into more moments of our lives to become more useful and more tailored to our experience. All of these things, though, ultimately augment and enhance the human experience. And I think that should be an underlying theme for the things that we're talking about today. And so, welcome to Botness.